Welcome, everyone. I am reporting once again from Shanghai, and I'm with Mimi, works for Wave Media, but she does incredible content on Instagram as well, showing the real China. Hey,
Hi, nice to meet everyone.
yeah, it's great to meet you here in China. I've been following your Instagram, your reporting from here in China.
Yes.
Maybe you could just introduce yourself and talk about why you're so interested in showing the real China. This channel talks about geopolitics and China's role and kind of debunking the narratives of the West and the US.
Yeah, well, I have lived all around the world. I've lived in the West for a lot of my life, and I decided to move to China last year. Oh, I'm sorry, my name is Mimi. And I decided to move to China just to be able to really experience it as an adult, also because I'm Chinese, I want to connect with my roots. But another big part of it was about debunking all of the lies that were coming out about China for so long. And I think because I've always had a connection to China through my family and just through coming here a lot as a kid, I always knew that these rumors were not true, because what I was seeing in the Western media was all about how, communism was turning all these people decrepit and the Chinese people were suffering and the West is so superior. And I know that China was in developing conditions and, has gone through a lot of changes and literally went through an entire social revolution. But I wanted to see it for myself. And not only that, I wanted to show it as well. So that's a little bit about me and why I'm here.
Yeah, well, let's talk about what China is doing. I mean, we have a world that is on fire in many respects. So we've been experiencing the dangerous conflict in Ukraine that has really ramped up the possibility of a great power confrontation between the West and Russia. We've had, of course, what's happening in West Asia. And then we go to Asia, in Asia Pacific, where, the United States has this strategy and policy of containment, encirclement.
Yeah.
And so how does this, I guess I'm curious about given that we live in a world like this, what has it told you about not just what China is doing, but why it's so important to talk about China?
Well, I think for a number of reasons, it's important to really study China because China offers an alternative, right, to the grip that Western hegemony and the US especially has on the world. I think with what the US and Israel have been jointly doing and how they have been pillaging and destroying Palestine, I think it should absolutely expose all of the ways that the US has actually pillaged and destroyed many other nations across the world, especially in the global south. And what we can learn from China is that China not only didn't participate in this similar behavior and the similar violence, but there was a development in China that actually was done through cooperation, through learning, through study, through sending its students out to just learn from other places, knowing that there were steps that needed to be taken. And so China already through its development took a very, very different route to the US and is once again going through a very different route where the US shows us that its main intention and goals here is just to squander and bully and interfere. And China doesn't do that. And so I think it's really important not only to understand how China doesn't do it, but why China doesn't do that, And it is rooted in socialism and it is rooted in communism. And it's so interesting when I engage with, I guess, anyone really in the West, regardless of their politics. A lot of them, I guess maybe before the last few months, were very anti-China for their own reasons. So I guess people from the right wing would be like, oh, China is so communist, it's disgusting, it's scary, it's frightening. And then people on the left would be like, China's not actually communist enough. China's actually very capitalist. And so for me, I was like, all these contradictions and all these mistruths are so messy and there's such a lack of clarity. So I actually think really studying China and its historical context is extremely beneficial to get clarity on what China is actually like and to actually study China as a real place instead of as this I don't know, fantastical or scary or whatever that the US or the West has painted it out to be. And I think at this point, we all really need to be very, very discerning or very clued in that what the US tells us is not true, and everything that the US tells us is mostly a projection
Right.
or a confession. And all these precautions or measures they're doing against China, they only do that because they have done exactly those things they're scared of to everyone else, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting because China is, and I think what has been scaring the West so much about China is that it is moving forward. I mean, look at the background. We're in a very quiet part of the Bund here in Shanghai. This used to be actually where I guess you could say the colonizers who attempted to colonize China.
Yes.
This is where they were
Yes.
living. They were stationed. This is where they occupied China. Many Chinese people weren't even allowed to be here for so many years prior to 1949, prior to what China calls the anti-fascist war, the world anti-fascist war.
Yeah.
So now China is progressing. China is it's a highly developed country. At least it's moving towards a high development status. It's alleviating poverty. It has skyrocketed ahead of the West and even the United States in most areas of high tech. I mean, China is progressing to this point where it is a challenger. It is, and this is the tough thing I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding, is that it is challenging U.S. global supremacy, U.S. hegemony,
Yes.
but it's not doing so in the way that the United States' political class will tell you. They'll tell you, oh, China's military is going to invade Taiwan. It's going to destroy Asia.
Yes.
It's not going to stop with Taiwan like they say with Russia. Not going to stop with Ukraine. It's going to go with the rest of the year. Oh, China's not going to stop with Taiwan. It's going to go to the Philippines. It's going to go to the rest of the South China Sea, the Asia countries in Southeast Asia. But what they're really scared of, it seems like, is the progress. So what's happening here and what that might do in a world that is pretty starving for, as you said, alternatives. So what's your take on this?
I mean, what they're scared of is that China is doing all of those things, and I mean, like, developing, you know, and like becoming such a like highly technological, but also people friendly and very sophisticated in terms of infrastructure, and quality of life is improving and poverty is being alleviated. They're so scared that that is happening in China without the violence and the techniques that they have used for their development. You know, that's what they're really afraid of. They're like, how is China doing this without the violence that we incurred on the world for like centuries? So it is like Western arrogance, of course, and I think it stems from a guilty conscience. But I think what China is doing once again is standing up, which is just a repeated notion from what China did in 1949 when China stood up and Mao Zedong stood at Tiananmen Square and said China has stood up when they did manage to defeat the Japanese invaders, when they did manage to defeat the nationalists who were trying to work together with the Nazis, you know? So China has stood up once again, and I think what has happened with the recent tariff wars is that China has shown the whole world that China has stood up to the US. What made me really proud about that is that I think other global South nations also followed suit, you know, and there were new trade relations being created with other global South nations with each other. So America used to be China's #1 exporter of soybeans. So, you know, that's where we got all of our soybeans in China. And now that relationship is changing where it's between Brazil and China. So Brazil really wins in this situation as well. And I want to see a world where there's more win-win when it comes to the global South. And that the US can finally realize that the world will actually be okay without them, you know, just controlling everybody and manipulating everybody. So I really like how China has handled the tariffs. I actually really like how China has handled a lot of the things that have happened, especially since Trump's administration. And what's so funny is that a lot of local Chinese people also love what's been happening, you know, and like we were saying before, the confidence of the Chinese people is really growing. And because Western hegemony, I think ideologically has had such a grip on the world, I think diasporas from every global South nation could probably say, oh, we moved to the US for a better life. You know, we moved to the US because the US offers all these opportunities. People in China absolutely believe that as well. But I think now the veil has been lifted. You know, people are seeing that the US actually doesn't offer a better life, one. And two, the US is actually a lot of the reasons why these people were refugees in the first place. And I think that's a very important point to make when we talk about the American dream, you know, like why was the American dream created? And also why did people have to flee where they came from? And a lot of the time you can actually connect the dots and connect it back to the US. So a lot of people in China know this very clearly. And so this whole American dream is shattered in China. Like people do not care about it, or they know that.
Well, it's the Chinese dream now. Yeah.
Talk about the Chinese dream, and the Chinese dream is common prosperity. It's not just like, I want to be rich and famous. It's very different. Yeah.
Hey everyone, we moved because the bund was actually closing and there was a message to get out. So now we are walking in a bit more of a dark area, but much quieter. But Mimi, continue.
Yeah, so as I was saying earlier, I think I've been really loving seeing what China is doing, because China is standing up, just as China did in 1949 against the Japanese invaders, against the nationalists who wanted to work with Nazi Germany. And so it's really amazing to see China stand up again, especially during this tariff war. I think that has really revealed a lot of what's been going on and how the US always tries to exploit and bully and undermine. And I think something that I really appreciated that came out of this whole situation is that the relationships between global South nations actually strengthened, and there were trade relationships as well. So I know President Xi, he went to meet many, many diplomatic leaders from many different global South regions. And, you know, with the whole celebration in Moscow that happened recently, another gathering of all these leaders. So it's been really amazing to see China stand up. And I do also feel like Chinese people have become more confident, because the American dream has been shattered. And I think a lot of people from many different global South communities can say that the American dream was once very appealing. You know, we were all fed this idea that America is where we can get better lives and we could get all these opportunities. And yet we always have to question why a lot of people had to be refugees or had to leave their countries in the first place. And unfortunately, you can trace a lot of that back to US imperialism most of the time, or, you know, European imperialism, etc. So I do feel like now, especially in China, there's a very strong confidence in being Chinese, in coming home, in, you know, leaving the States or leaving the West and being able to use our skills to be here. And also to not buy into the American dream anymore, and to see for ourselves what that actually means, you know, and what that American dream is built on, which is violence and occupation and genocide.
And a lot of myth making. I mean, it's so interesting because a lot of people, even who watch this channel, will ask, Danny, why are you so anti-American? Why are you so anti-Trump? Why are you being so negative about all of this? And it's like the track record speaks for itself. And I think what scares the United States' political class, the elites, the ruling elites, those who really make so-called foreign policy, is that China is now not only able to stand up, as you said, but it stands up and it is succeeding and it is winning in many respects in so many areas, in probably all areas that matter to the United States. The United States, as the elites, not ordinary people, they get swept up into this because they're the ones who are constantly being told how bad China is, how powerful it is, how scary it is,
Right.
how it's going to essentially take all of their lunch money and leave them with nothing, how it's already done that in many respects. But the reality is that the fear is coming from, it seems, that China is not going to end up like Yugoslavia. It's not going to end up like the Soviet Union. It's not going to end up like so many countries that have been invaded, overthrown, destroyed. I think the United States' ruling elite, those who are making policy, they kind of understand this, and they just can't take it. They want they want it to be gone so badly, and the reality is it's not going anywhere. It's like every time I come here, I say, "Wow, no, this does not feel like it's going anywhere. It feels like it's going to continue to progress." But what's your response to this? Viewers who might ask me, "What, you're being so positive? You're being so why don't you acknowledge all this bad that we've been told about China?
Hi, viewers. I actually do that for a living. I always address all the bad. And I just want you to know that I think it's very important, especially as someone who loves China, who loves living here, who loves studying China. I never ever want to state that China is a perfect utopia. I say that it presents alternatives, but it is a society of 1.4 billion people. How could it not have its own issues? How can there not be contradictions? How can there not be consequences of such a rapidly developing country? Sure, but all the problems that the US feels about China are simply not factual. If you really want to talk about problems with China, then we can do it from a factual, materialist basis, right? Let's talk about, I don't know, for example, like the competition when it comes to finding jobs, because the classes are shifting, the middle class is growing, there's so many people being very highly educated. So yes, there is a consequence of that. But let's be realistic. I don't want to address Western lies about China anymore. I want to address true, factual, materialist things that are happening on the ground in China. And a lot of them, I'm sorry, are amazing. Like, I think this series is really great because as we are walking, you can literally see behind us, there's no litter. There's no rubbish. It is like so clean. And I used to live in New York. I know that the most wealthy city in America has rubbish strewn all over. It's so smelly. Like there's urine everywhere. You know, there's people without homes. There's people who are suffering from drug addiction. Like that is everywhere in the United States, in the richest city in the country. So not only does the US fail to tell the truth about China, the US fails to tell the truth about itself because the US is failing its own people every single day. And so I think that it's really important to connect these dots. And when we actually do talk about how China is offering alternatives, in the same breath, we are also alluding to the ways that American capitalism is failing its people. And I think that's really important to just connect all these dots that are very clear to us right now. And I think our job is to just connect them.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of this can kind of be turned on its head. For example, when I think about what China is doing in terms of moving fast towards being the economic power, the leader of the world, one of the big ways it has to do so is through developing its military. But why does it need to? We hear all the time, why is China growing so fast militarily? Well, a big portion of the entire Pentagon budget is literally directed toward the Indo-Pacific Command, which is actively encircling China, which has stationed special forces to train the Philippines military, Taiwan, which is part of China, its so-called military.
Right.
So China needs to innovate and continue to push forward militarily so it can defend itself. So all the things you hear, oh, well, why is China so why is China, it's so oppressive towards its ethnic minorities? Well, China actually has a policy. It needs to be intentional about how ethnic minorities are treated, but not in the way that the United States or the Western media portray it. It needs to do this because China has many different ethnic groups and regions of China are so different. And for example, Xinjiang, where I've been to many times, like that used to be one of the most poor, isolated, and really just struggling provinces in the entire country. But China said, well, we need to have a special policy to make sure that their lives are better than they were prior. So that is just so different.
Yeah.
But we get well, here is why China is so bad. Here's why China is a danger. And it just fuels, I think, a redirection and a misdirection of the West, especially the Western mind, toward problems that don't really exist.
Yeah.
But they're problems that are far more acceptable to perseverate over than, let's say, the threat of the United States sparking a global catastrophic nuclear war with Russia or China or Iran, genocide on Palestinians, the destabilization of the entire planet, the world financial system that they dominate crumbling. and doing so while burying people alive, essentially economically. I mean, these things are not convenient to talk about. So it's much more convenient to talk about
China.
the red menace. China is the red menace. It's the yellow peril. It needs to be
My God.
subdued.
One of my least favorite lies is actually the one about the ethnic minority groups, because it could not be further from the truth. Like, first of all, China has 56 ethnic minority groups, and it's always been known, like, to local Chinese people, that nobody is higher than the other, no one is better than the other. We exist in harmony. We have existed in harmony for centuries, 5,000 years, actually. And so I think the US, being such a young nation of 400 years? Like, young. The US, what did the US do to its native people? You know, what did the US occupiers do when they came to the continent? They slaughtered, they massacred, they did a genocide. And so I think that people in the US cannot fathom the idea of ethnic unity. They cannot fathom the idea of ethnic diversity. And so they spread this lie about Han supremacy because there is white supremacy in the US that they are unwilling to address and unwilling to reflect on. And so they're like, but China's doing that, which is just absolutely untrue. And I have been to so many places within China. I'm so fortunate to have been to so many different places where there are huge celebrations of every ethnic group you can imagine. There is government funding that goes into preserving all the culture. They talk about a cultural genocide. I'm telling you, the culture is alive and well. Don't worry about us. You know, it's been alive and well for 5,000 years, and it will continue to be alive. But like you said before, like, why is China growing in military? I mean, look at all of the US's strategic partners. Literally, South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, Taiwan, they're right there. You know, China has to defend itself. China has to stand up. And I think people can't stand it when they see China stand up. You know, and they see China actually do things that the West can't pinpoint, because the US is the culprit of so many of the things that they accuse China of doing. It's bizarre, it's remarkable, but I think when you finally realize that and you just hold the mirror up towards the US, then for me, I'm like, okay, I'm actually going to explore what the truth is, and I'm actually going to explore what telling real stories are, instead of getting really caught up in all the jargon and the lies and the CIA-funded color revolutions that the US continues to churn. So
Yeah, well, I think that's a good place to close here. I think there's so much truth to be learned about coming to China, about learning from people like you, Mimi. I think it should be shocking to the warmongers in the West, in the United States in particular, what China is doing, because I think this is telling us, this moment in history is telling us that there are paths that are converging and colliding, and that is, you know, the U.S. path, unipolarity, of hegemony, of full spectrum dominance, of imperial expansionism. All of that is now colliding with a new model, a model that is more fair, more just. It's multipolar. It's about sovereignty. It's about self-determination. And it's about pursuing your own development path that's in the interests of the people. And that is very, very frightening for those very tiny few people in the world who have profited so much on the opposite. But Mimi, it was great to be with you. Anything you want to share before we head out?
please learn about China and free Palestine.
All right, everybody. Take care from Shanghai. I hope you enjoyed the scenery. It's late out here, but the lights are on.
And it's clean.
Yes, and it's peaceful, everyone. Take care. I'll be back soon. Bye-bye.